Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. It's a pleasure to welcome back Member of Parliament Rick Perkins to Boom and Bust. He is the Conservative Shadow Minister for Innovation, Science and Economic Development and the Member of Parliament for South Shore, St. Margaret's, Nova Scotia. Welcome.
Always a pleasure to be here, Tony.
Rick, obviously, want to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the Trump tariffs, so to speak. Now, as we're taping this, we don't know what will be happening in the imminent future, but would like to get sort of your general reaction to the situation that we find ourselves in.
Well, I think I begin by saying, obviously, it's an understatement to say how important our economic relationship is with the United States and has been for many, many decades. Our economies are intertwined, and that's because we both have things the others need. We have the natural resources and the brain power and some technology that they need that they do not have in the United States. And so it's an important two-way relationship. Um, but for those who think this is sort of President Trump at 3 a.m. tweeting sort of crazy stuff that it seems, this has actually been something that Donald Trump began talking about in the 1980s, believe it or not, before we even had a free trade agreement in the United States. In 1987, he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times on the trade deficit issue that the U.S. has with most countries in the world, and that the open trading system was diminishing the U.S.'s ability to have manufacturing jobs. So this is a long-held belief, and recently we've seen him speaking about President McKinley and the days when tariffs were the primary source of tax revenue for the federal government before World War I in the United States. And this is, I don't believe it's just a negotiating tool, but obviously we have to spend some time helping the U.S. understand what the impacts of that are. And if President Trump does actually impose the tariffs without exceptions, as our leader Pierre Poilievre said, is that we have to get into a dollar for dollar exchange with them, but also continue, obviously, the positive discussions to try and ensure that we have a beneficial relationship on both sides for our economy.
No, and I think that's definitely a reasonable position given the circumstances. But it's. I think you're right that this has been looming for a number of years, and the current government really hasn't done anything to improve the resiliency of the Canadian economy. So how did we get to this crisis stage, do you think?
So that's a great point, because President Trump was pursuing tariffs on issues, even on Canada, in his first administration. So he's made it clear that he believes that returning manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. is his priority. We are exposed, right? And we've been exposed because for the last 10 years, we've had a liberal government, that has had a war on all our resource industries, our renewable and non-renewable, especially oil and gas. 60% of the imported oil that the United States gets comes from Canada, and specifically Alberta. And it's a unique quality of oil that can't be duplicated anywhere else in the world. It would require massive change to the refinery processing system, which doesn't happen overnight. But our problem is that the government over the last 10 years brought in policies, the No Pipelines Bill, the anti-capital bill, as I've always called it, that has had a goal of shutting down our oil industry. So we're exposed in this, where they brought in this legislation, the IAA, the Impact Assessment Act, which made it impossible to get energy and capital projects approved in Canada, and capital left. And even to the point where the government had to buy the only pipeline under construction, and the rest just left. And if we had built the other pipelines and didn't have these anti-capital policies in place that the Trudeau Liberals put in place, we would have had more pipelines to Tidewater in BC, and we would have had a pipeline to Eastern Canada, so the part of the world that I live in wouldn't have to depend on Saudi Arabian oil. And our imports of oil are all primarily in Atlantic Canada
Right.
because there is no pipeline to Atlantic Canada with Canadian oil or gas. So we have to depend on imports. And we heat with oil
Yeah,
in Nova Scotia. We don't have nuclear energy.
exactly. Rick, we're going to take a bit of a break. We'll be back with you after these commercial messages.